The most dangerous lies are the ones we finish telling ourselves. Midnight settled gently over Blackridge Palace, wrapping its towering stone walls in silver moonlight while the last council meeting of the evening continued behind heavy oak doors. The corridors were nearly silent except for the distant crackle of fireplace embers and the soft echo of footsteps belonging to servants finishing their final duties before dawn. Claire Bennet walked quietly through the eastern hallway with an ancient leather ledger pressed carefully against her chest. She had spent hours restoring fragile royal records inside the archives and had only realized moments earlier that one important volume had been left near the council chamber. Hoping not to disturb anyone, she intended only to leave the ledger outside the door and return to her room unnoticed. Respect had always guided every step she took inside Blackridge Palace. She never interrupted meetings, never sought attention, and never expected her quiet kindness to be remembered. As she reached the carved oak entrance, familiar voices drifted through the narrow gap beneath the door. She immediately stopped walking, intending to wait until the discussion ended. Then she heard the unmistakable voice of Alpha King Adrian Hawthorne. Calm, steady, and impossible to mistake, his words carried the quiet authority that united every northern pack. "There is no reason to delay," he said. A second voice asked carefully, "Should we wait until sunrise?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "No. Before dawn, she will disappear." Claire froze. Her fingers tightened around the leather ledger until the worn edges pressed against her palms. For one terrifying heartbeat she could not breathe. "Before dawn, she will disappear." The sentence repeated over and over inside her mind, drowning out every other voice still speaking beyond the council chamber. She never heard anyone mention coded intelligence. She never heard discussion of border security. She never heard the advisors continue describing a dangerous infiltrator hidden somewhere inside the kingdom. Her heart had already decided the meaning of the unfinished sentence before the conversation itself had ended. She quietly stepped backward, terrified that even the smallest sound might reveal her presence. Memories rushed through her thoughts with painful clarity. Every warm cup of mountain tea Adrian had quietly thanked her for preparing after long nights in the archives. Every thoughtful glance across crowded rooms. The spring afternoon when he had handed her a single moonlit flower after noticing she admired it growing beside the northern cliffs. She had treasured those small moments in silence, believing perhaps they meant something more than simple kindness. Now she convinced herself she had misunderstood everything. Perhaps he had always intended for her to leave. Perhaps he had simply delayed saying the words directly. A quiet ache settled deep inside her chest, but no tears fell. Claire had always believed dignity was strongest when carried without witnesses. She turned away from the council chamber and walked through the endless palace corridors that suddenly felt unfamiliar despite being her home for years. Candlelight flickered against polished marble floors while moonlight spilled through tall windows overlooking peaceful gardens. Everything remained exactly the same, yet she felt as though she had already become a stranger wandering through someone else's memories. When she reached her small room overlooking the eastern courtyard, she carefully placed the forgotten ledger upon her desk and stood beside the open window. Beyond the palace walls, the dark outline of whispering pines stretched beneath the stars, waiting in complete silence. Claire rested one trembling hand against the windowsill and watched the night breeze move gently through the distant trees. If the Alpha King truly wished her gone before sunrise, she would leave before he ever needed to ask twice. Claire remained beside the open window until the palace bells quietly marked midnight, watching pale moonlight drift across the eastern courtyard where rows of white roses swayed gently beneath the cool mountain breeze. Everything outside appeared peaceful, untouched by the storm now unfolding inside her heart. She slowly turned away from the window and looked around the small room that had become her home since arriving at Blackridge Palace years earlier. There had never been many possessions to call her own. A carefully folded cream-colored dress rested inside a wooden chest beside two simple aprons, a weathered journal filled with quiet observations, a sewing kit passed down by her late grandmother, and a gray traveling cloak she had repaired so many times the stitches had become part of its story. She packed each belonging with steady hands, refusing to hurry even though every passing minute carried her closer to dawn. Every familiar object awakened another memory she wished she could leave behind. She remembered long winter evenings restoring centuries-old royal records while snow covered the palace roofs. She remembered planting wildflowers along the eastern garden because she believed every traveler deserved to arrive somewhere beautiful. She remembered preparing fresh mountain tea before sunrise, quietly placing it upon the Alpha King's desk before anyone else entered the study. She had never expected him to notice, yet somehow he always did. A faint smile touched her lips before disappearing again. Perhaps gratitude had been all those moments ever meant. Her eyes drifted toward a small carved wooden box resting upon the windowsill. Carefully opening it, she found a single pressed moonlit flower preserved between smooth sheets of parchment. Adrian had handed it to her during an early spring afternoon after catching her admiring the blossoms growing near the northern cliffs. She still remembered his quiet words. Beautiful things deserve to be appreciated. She had treasured that simple sentence ever since, believing for one impossible moment that perhaps he had been speaking about more than flowers. Tonight she gently closed the box and placed it back exactly where it belonged. Some memories were too precious to carry away. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Claire quickly brushed away the tears beginning to gather before opening the door. Mrs. Evelyn Carter, the elderly palace housekeeper, stood smiling warmly while carrying neatly folded linens. "You are still awake, dear?" she asked kindly. Claire nodded. "I wanted everything to be in order before morning." Mrs. Carter laughed softly. "That sounds exactly like you. Always thinking of everyone else." She reached forward and squeezed Claire's hand with quiet affection. "Do not forget that someone should think about you sometimes as well." Claire managed a grateful smile. "Thank you. I will remember." The older woman wished her a peaceful night before disappearing down the corridor, never realizing she had just said goodbye forever. After gently closing the door, Claire removed the silver moonstone pendant from around her neck and carefully placed it upon the writing desk. It had been Adrian's gift, and she believed it should remain where it belonged. She looked around the room one final time. Every book remained neatly arranged. Every candle had been extinguished. Every blanket had been folded. Nothing suggested sadness. Nothing suggested farewell. She quietly slipped her satchel over one shoulder, wrapped herself in the gray cloak, and stepped into the silent hallway. Without leaving a letter, asking a question, or waiting for sunrise, Claire walked through the servants' entrance beneath the eastern tower and disappeared beyond the palace gates, believing she was simply honoring the final wish of the man she had loved without ever asking for anything in return. Morning arrived quietly over Blackridge Palace, bathing its ancient towers in warm golden light while the kingdom awakened to another ordinary day. Servants crossed the courtyards carrying baskets of fresh bread, stable hands prepared horses for the morning patrols, and scholars filled the library with whispered conversations as sunlight streamed through towering stained glass windows. To everyone else, the palace continued its familiar rhythm without interruption. Only one quiet presence was missing, and no one had yet understood how deeply that absence would be felt. Inside the royal strategy chamber, Alpha King Adrian Hawthorne stood before a massive oak table covered with maps, sealed reports, and handwritten letters gathered from every northern territory. His silver eyes calmly followed each document while his trusted beta, Rowan Hayes, summarized the latest patrol reports from the eastern border. Adrian listened with the same discipline that had earned the respect of every allied pack. Decisions concerning trade routes, mountain roads, and village supplies were discussed one after another with careful precision. When the final counselor quietly excused himself, Adrian remained alone beside the tall windows overlooking the eastern gardens. He reached almost absent-mindedly toward the corner of his desk where a steaming cup of mountain tea normally waited every morning. Today the polished tray remained empty. He paused for only a second before assuming someone had simply forgotten. There were more important matters demanding his attention. Yet as he moved toward the library to examine several historical agreements, another small detail quietly unsettled him. The fresh flowers decorating the hallway had not been replaced. Normally someone always arranged new wildflowers before sunrise, filling the eastern corridor with soft color and the gentle scent of the mountains. Adrian slowed his pace without fully understanding why the empty vase seemed strangely noticeable. Entering the royal library, he found shelves perfectly organized and reading tables carefully prepared, yet the familiar figure usually moving quietly between the towering bookcases was nowhere to be seen. He approached the chief librarian with polite curiosity. "Has Miss Bennet already completed her work this morning?" The elderly librarian looked genuinely surprised. "No, Your Majesty. She has not arrived." Adrian nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps she has been assigned elsewhere." The librarian hesitated before answering softly. "Miss Bennet has never missed a morning in all the years she has served here." Those simple words remained with him as he continued through the palace. Every corridor seemed just a little quieter. Every familiar routine felt slightly incomplete. Passing the eastern garden, Adrian noticed several young gardeners struggling to arrange the flower beds. Claire always offered gentle suggestions that somehow made every corner of the palace feel warmer without seeking recognition for any of it. He found himself remembering the afternoon she had carefully replanted a damaged rose bush instead of replacing it because she believed living things deserved patience before being abandoned. At the time he had admired her kindness without realizing how naturally it had become part of his own daily life. Standing alone beneath the blooming trees, he looked across the peaceful gardens where morning sunlight danced upon the stone paths. For reasons he could not explain, he instinctively searched the familiar walkways, expecting to see a gray cloak moving quietly among the flowers. Nothing stirred except the gentle breeze. A strange emptiness settled over him, not dramatic enough to be called fear, yet impossible to ignore. For the first time in many years, Alpha King Adrian Hawthorne realized that the palace had not become quieter because the morning was peaceful. It had become quieter because someone whose gentle presence had quietly filled every ordinary day was no longer there. The quiet uneasiness remained with Adrian throughout the afternoon, growing stronger with every passing hour despite his determination to focus on the responsibilities of the crown. He reviewed trade agreements, approved harvest requests from neighboring villages, and listened patiently as visiting delegates discussed preparations for the coming winter, yet his thoughts repeatedly drifted toward the same unanswered question. Why had Claire failed to appear? She had never neglected even the smallest responsibility. When the final meeting ended, Adrian set aside the last parchment and slowly rose from his chair. Rowan Hayes noticed the unusual silence immediately. "Your Majesty, is something troubling you?" Adrian glanced toward the eastern windows where the afternoon sunlight stretched across the gardens. "Come with me." Without another explanation, the two men crossed the familiar corridors until they stopped outside a modest wooden door overlooking the eastern courtyard. Claire's room. Adrian hesitated for a brief moment before gently knocking. No answer came. He carefully opened the door and stepped inside. Warm sunlight filled the small room, illuminating everything with peaceful stillness. The bed had been neatly made. The shelves remained perfectly arranged. Every book rested exactly where it belonged. Fresh air drifted through the open window carrying the scent of blooming roses from the courtyard below. Nothing suggested panic. Nothing suggested haste. Instead, every detail reflected quiet intention, as though someone had wished to leave behind only order and gratitude. Adrian slowly walked farther inside, his silver eyes moving across the familiar surroundings until they stopped at the writing desk beside the window. Resting carefully upon its polished surface lay a silver moonstone pendant. He recognized it immediately. Months earlier he had commissioned the simple necklace after learning how many evenings Claire quietly spent restoring priceless royal records long after everyone else had retired. She had tried to refuse the gift, insisting she had only done her duty, but he had gently persuaded her to accept it as a symbol of appreciation. Since then she had worn it every day. Now it had been left behind. Adrian reached toward the pendant and lifted it carefully into his hand. The polished stone reflected the afternoon light, and with it came memories he had never realized he carried so closely. Claire smiling softly while arranging fresh flowers in the eastern corridor. Claire quietly placing a cup of mountain tea upon his desk before sunrise. Claire kneeling in the palace gardens, patiently saving a damaged rose instead of replacing it. Rowan looked around the room before speaking quietly. Everything has been packed with great care. Adrian nodded almost absent-mindedly. She intended not to return. At that moment the elderly house steward, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, appeared in the doorway after hearing voices nearby. Her expression immediately softened when she saw the empty room. "Your Majesty," she said gently, "Miss Bennet spoke with me last night." She seemed peaceful, although perhaps a little quieter than usual. "I believed she was simply tired." Adrian turned toward her. "Did she tell you where she planned to go?" Mrs. Whitmore slowly shook her head. "No, Your Majesty. She only thanked me for everything and wished me a pleasant morning. I thought nothing of it." Adrian looked back toward the open window where the breeze stirred the curtains with quiet grace. A strange certainty settled inside him. Claire had not left because she desired adventure or change. She had left believing she no longer belonged within these walls. Holding the moonstone pendant tightly in his hand, Adrian stared beyond the palace gardens toward the distant outline of whispering pines stretching across the horizon beneath the fading afternoon sky, unaware that the answer to her sudden disappearance was hidden inside a single unfinished sentence spoken only one night before. Adrian remained standing beside the open window long after the evening breeze had carried the scent of roses through Claire's empty room. The silver moonstone pendant rested quietly in his hand, heavier than any royal seal he had ever carried. He turned it slowly beneath the fading sunlight, remembering the afternoon he had placed it into Claire's hands after she had spent countless evenings restoring priceless records that others believed were beyond saving. She had smiled with quiet surprise and insisted she had only fulfilled her duty. He had wanted to tell her that her kindness had become part of the soul of Blackridge Palace itself. Instead, he had simply thanked her and walked away. Rowan watched the silence settle across the room before speaking carefully. "Your Majesty, there is something about last night's council meeting that continues to trouble me." Adrian looked toward him. "Go on." Rowan folded his arms thoughtfully as he replayed every conversation from the previous evening. Councillor Everett asked whether the infiltrator should be arrested immediately or whether we should wait until sunrise. Adrian nodded slowly. The memory was beginning to return. "I answered that there was no reason to delay." Rowan continued. "Your exact words were, 'Before dawn, she will disappear.'" The room suddenly felt impossibly still. Adrian closed his eyes for a brief moment as every detail of the meeting returned with complete clarity. The female infiltrator had entered Blackridge Palace disguised as a servant. The council had discussed coded intelligence, hidden routes, and secure checkpoints. His words had referred only to the spy who planned to flee before sunrise. Nothing more. Rowan quietly added, if Miss Bennet happened to be outside the chamber and heard only that sentence, she would never have remained long enough to hear the explanation. Adrian looked toward the doorway as though he could somehow see Claire standing there the previous night with the forgotten ledger in her hands. He knew her well enough to understand exactly what she would have done. She would have stepped away immediately out of respect for the privacy of the council. She would never have listened to another word. His gaze slowly lowered toward the moonstone pendant resting in his palm. "She believed I was speaking about her," he whispered. Rowan did not answer because there was nothing left to explain. The painful truth had already revealed itself. Adrian drew a slow breath. "She misunderstood my words because I never gave her better ones to remember." Every quiet gesture he had offered over the years had depended upon silence. The flowers. The tea. The thoughtful conversations in the library. The moonstone. He had believed kindness alone could speak what he had never found the courage to say aloud. Instead, one unfinished sentence had erased every silent promise she thought she had imagined. Adrian carefully closed his hand around the pendant before walking toward the balcony overlooking the distant mountains. Beyond the palace walls, whispering pines stretched beneath the evening sky like an endless sea of dark green. Somewhere inside those ancient forests, Claire believed she had honored the final wish of the man she loved. The realization settled deep inside his heart with quiet certainty. He turned back toward Rowan, and the regret in his silver eyes gave way to calm determination. Send riders to every northern village, every ranger station, every mountain pass, and every watchtower, he ordered. Tell them they are searching for Claire Bennett. No one is to frighten her. No one is to force her home. They are only to let her know that she has never been unwanted. Rowan bowed without hesitation before leaving to carry out the command. Alone once more, Adrian looked toward the fading light beyond the palace walls and spoke so softly that only the evening breeze carried the words away. This time, Claire, I will come to you before another dawn arrives. Before the first light touched the mountain peaks, Blackridge Palace awakened with unusual purpose. Stable doors opened one after another as horses were prepared beneath glowing lanterns, royal messengers secured heavy cloaks against the morning chill, and forest rangers gathered beside the eastern gate awaiting their assignments. Every order carried the same quiet instruction. Claire Bennett was to be found with kindness, never with force. Adrian Hawthorne stepped into the courtyard wearing a simple black traveling cloak instead of ceremonial robes, choosing practicality over royal appearance. The silver moonstone pendant rested safely inside his cloak, close to his heart. Rowan Hayes approached carrying a detailed map of the northern forests marked with rivers, mountain trails, ranger stations, and hidden footpaths known only to those who regularly traveled beyond the kingdom. If Claire wished to avoid villages, Rowan said, tracing a narrow stream with one finger, she would most likely follow the old woodland paths through whispering pines. She always preferred quiet places whenever she needed time to think. Adrian studied the map only briefly before folding it. Then that is where we begin. Rowan hesitated. The council has requested your presence this morning. Adrian calmly met his friend's eyes. The kingdom can wait one day for its king. I will not ask Claire to wait one more hour for the truth. Captain Ellis soon arrived with several experienced royal guards. Every watchtower has received your message, he reported respectfully. The village elders, traveling merchants, and forest rangers have also been informed. Everyone understands she is not to be frightened. They are only to help if she wishes. Adrian nodded gratefully before mounting his horse. Within moments, riders departed through different palace gates, each following separate routes leading toward valleys, rivers, and woodland trails. The search spread quietly across the northern territory like the first rays of dawn. Far beyond the palace walls, Claire walked alone beneath towering pine trees where cool morning light filtered gently through endless branches. The peaceful forest welcomed her with the scent of cedar, wildflowers, and fresh earth after the night's gentle mist. A narrow stream wound gracefully between smooth stones while birds greeted the new day from high among the branches. Although sadness still rested quietly inside her heart, the silence of the forest eased the heaviness she had carried since leaving Blackridge Palace. There were no whispered conversations here, no council chambers, and no painful reminders of words she believed had ended her place within the kingdom. As she followed the stream, a faint cry reached her ears. She immediately stopped and listened carefully. The sound came again from beyond a fallen cedar tree covered with soft green moss. Setting her satchel upon the ground, Claire slowly stepped closer until she discovered a tiny white wolf pup resting beneath the exposed roots. One small paw was caught awkwardly between smooth stones, and the frightened little creature looked toward her with bright silver eyes. Claire knelt carefully, making every movement gentle and calm. Do not be afraid, she whispered softly. I will not leave you alone. The tiny wolf remained perfectly still as she carefully freed its paw and wrapped it with a clean strip of linen from her satchel. After several cautious moments, the little creature stood, tested its footing, and slowly walked toward her before gently resting its head against her hand. High above the forest trail, hidden among the branches, two royal forest rangers quietly watched the unexpected moment unfold. They exchanged astonished glances because the rare guardian bloodline almost never trusted strangers so quickly. Without taking their eyes off Claire and the little wolf, one ranger carefully reached for the enchanted signaling crystal hanging beneath his cloak, knowing the quiet light it carried would soon lead someone very important directly toward the woman who still believed she had been forgotten. The little white guardian wolf remained close beside Claire as though it had already decided she was someone worth trusting. After testing its bandaged paw with a few careful steps, it circled happily around her before sitting at her feet and looking up with bright silver eyes filled with quiet affection. Claire laughed softly, surprised by how quickly the lonely ache inside her heart began to ease. She gently stroked the soft fur behind its ears, grateful for the unexpected companionship. "I think you have been brave enough for one morning," she whispered with a warm smile. "Now you should rest." The tiny wolf answered with a contented sound before following her toward the edge of the stream, where sunlight shimmered across the clear water and painted golden reflections beneath the towering pines. Hidden high among the branches overlooking the clearing, the two royal forest rangers continued watching in respectful silence. Both men had spent years protecting the ancient woodland and the rare guardian bloodline that called it home. Neither had ever witnessed one of the young guardians approach a stranger with such immediate trust. The older ranger slowly lowered his field glass and quietly shook his head in amazement. "He chose her without hesitation," he murmured. "Even experienced handlers have needed weeks to earn that kind of confidence." The younger ranger carefully removed the enchanted signaling crystal hanging beneath his cloak and held it toward the morning light. A gentle silver glow awakened inside the crystal before traveling invisibly across the northern forests toward every matching stone carried by the royal search parties. Several miles away, Adrian guided his horse along a narrow woodland trail when Rowan suddenly noticed the crystal fastened to his saddle begin shining with the same soft light. He immediately raised his hand. "Your Majesty." Adrian turned his horse. "You have received something." Rowan nodded. "The Western Ranger Patrol has found one of the guardian pups." Adrian looked puzzled for only a moment before Rowan continued. "The Guardians rarely trust anyone outside the royal household. If one willingly remains beside someone, the Rangers always investigate because they believe the wolves recognize the hearts of those who mean no harm." Hope quietly replaced the uncertainty that had followed Adrian since Claire disappeared. Without another question, he gently urged his horse toward the western trails while Rowan and several royal guards followed close behind. Branches swayed overhead as sunlight flickered through the endless rows of ancient pines, every hoofbeat carrying them closer to the quiet clearing. Meanwhile, Claire remained completely unaware that anyone searched for her. She sat beside the stream watching the little guardian wolf chase drifting leaves carried gently across the water before returning to curl peacefully against her side. For the first time since leaving Blackridge Palace, she felt the constant weight inside her chest become just a little lighter. She believed she had left behind the only home she had ever truly known, yet the forest had answered her loneliness with unexpected kindness instead of silence. The tiny guardian suddenly lifted its head, ears turning toward the distant trees. A familiar scent had reached it long before human senses could notice. Claire looked up as well, hearing only the faint whisper of wind moving through the branches. Then, somewhere beyond the towering pines, the quiet rhythm of approaching horses echoed through the forest. The sound was still distant, softened by hills and trees, but with every passing moment it grew a little clearer. Claire remained still, uncertain whether the riders belonged to travelers, forest rangers, or someone she never expected to see again, while the little guardian wolf rose happily to its feet as though preparing to welcome an old friend whose arrival would change everything before another sunset. The gentle rhythm of approaching horses finally came to a stop beyond the line of towering pine trees, and for several quiet seconds the forest held its breath. Claire slowly rose from the smooth stone beside the stream, brushing a few loose strands of pale hair away from her face while the tiny white guardian wolf stood faithfully at her side. Through the shifting sunlight between the ancient branches, a familiar figure stepped into the clearing. Adrian Hawthorne removed his riding gloves before taking another careful step forward, making certain his movements carried no sense of urgency or command. Rowan and the Royal Rangers remained several yards behind him, choosing silence over interruption. Claire lowered her eyes for a brief moment before offering the same respectful greeting she had spoken countless times inside Blackridge Palace. "Your Majesty." Adrian looked at her with unmistakable relief. The long search, the sleepless night, and every fearful possibility quietly disappeared the instant he saw she was safe. "Claire," he answered softly. "I have been trying to find you." She looked genuinely puzzled. "Why?" The single word carried no anger, only quiet confusion, and somehow that hurt Adrian more than any accusation could have. She truly believed there had never been a reason for him to come after her. Leaving several respectful feet between them, Adrian spoke with complete honesty. "Because I could not allow you to leave believing something that was never true." Claire slowly folded her hands together. "I heard your decision myself." Her voice remained calm despite the sadness hidden beneath every word. "You said that before dawn she would disappear." Adrian closed his eyes briefly before looking back at her. "Yes," he admitted. "I said those words." Claire lowered her gaze toward the flowing stream. "I thought you were speaking about me." Silence settled gently across the clearing while the breeze carried the scent of cedar and wildflowers through the afternoon air. The guardian wolf quietly sat between them, watching both faces with curious silver eyes. Adrian reached inside his traveling cloak and carefully removed the silver moonstone pendant. Sunlight reflected softly across its polished surface. "When I entered your room," he said, "I found this waiting for me." Claire looked at the familiar necklace and felt her heart tighten. "I believed it belonged in the palace." Adrian slowly shook his head. "It belonged with you from the moment I gave it to you." He drew a slow breath before continuing. "Claire, the council was discussing a woman who had entered the kingdom under a false identity. She intended to leave before sunrise. My words were about her and no one else." Claire looked up, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. She found only quiet sincerity. Adrian continued gently. "You heard one sentence because you were too respectful to remain outside that door. I never realized that my silence afterward would become louder than every kindness I had tried to show you." Tears gathered in Claire's light blue eyes, though she smiled faintly through them. "I spent the entire journey believing I had imagined every thoughtful thing you ever did." Adrian stepped one pace closer while still giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished. "You imagined nothing. I simply believed my actions spoke clearly enough, and I was wrong." The little guardian wolf happily nudged Claire's hand before trotting over to Adrian and touching his boot with its nose, as though quietly refusing to let either of them hide behind silence any longer. Adrian carefully offered the moonstone pendant toward Claire once again. She accepted it with trembling hands, and for the first time since leaving Blackridge Palace, hope quietly replaced the sorrow she had carried through the forest, while the golden afternoon light promised that the truth had finally arrived before another dawn could separate them again. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The gentle sound of the forest stream filled the silence while the evening breeze carried the fragrance of cedar and wildflowers through the quiet clearing. Claire looked down at the moonstone pendant resting in her hands before carefully lifting it toward her heart. She had left Blackridge Palace believing she was returning something that no longer belonged to her. Now she understood that she had almost abandoned something far more precious than a simple gift. Adrian remained where he stood, allowing her every moment she needed. He knew trust could never be demanded. It could only be earned again. Claire finally looked into his silver eyes and offered a faint smile touched by relief. "I should have asked what those words truly meant." Adrian answered with gentle honesty. "And I should have spoken the words I kept hiding behind silence." The little white guardian wolf happily trotted between them, brushing first against Claire's leg before nudging Adrian's hand as though reminding them that the longest journeys often ended with the smallest step forward. Claire laughed softly, the sound brighter than it had been in many days. Adrian carefully accepted the moonstone pendant from her trembling hands and respectfully fastened the silver chain around her neck once more. As the polished stone rested above her heart again, the weight she had carried since leaving the palace seemed to fade with the evening light. Rowan and the royal rangers quietly turned away, giving them the privacy that neither interruption nor ceremony could improve. Together, Adrian and Claire began walking back toward the woodland trail leading home, neither of them speaking very much because the truth they had finally shared no longer required many words. 2 mornings later, the first rays of sunlight spread across the ancient towers of Blackridge Palace as nobles, scholars, royal guards, servants, healers, and village representatives gathered inside the eastern courtyard. Many expected the Alpha King to address recent security concerns. Instead, Adrian stepped forward with calm confidence and looked across the people who had placed their trust in him. A kingdom is protected not only by strong walls or careful plans, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the peaceful courtyard. It is also protected when every loyal heart knows it is seen, valued, and never left alone with unnecessary doubt. He turned toward Claire, who stood nearby wearing the restored moonstone pendant with quiet grace. Rather than asking her to remain behind him according to long-standing custom, Adrian extended his hand with a warm smile. "Walk beside me." Claire accepted without hesitation, standing shoulder to shoulder with him as the morning light illuminated both of them equally. Around the courtyard, every member of the royal household lowered their heads with quiet respect, recognizing not only the wisdom of their king but also the gentle strength of the woman whose kindness had quietly transformed the palace long before anyone truly noticed. The little white guardian wolf bounded happily through the blooming gardens near the fountain before stopping to look back at them with bright silver eyes, as though satisfied that every wandering path had finally led where it was always meant to end. As the golden sunrise bathed Blackridge Palace in new light, Claire realized that love had never asked her to disappear before dawn. It had simply been waiting for honesty to arrive before another sunrise could be lost, leaving behind a quiet reminder that the strongest hearts are not those that never misunderstand, but those willing to forgive, to listen, and to walk forward together with hope instead of fear.